And today we'll talk about interest groups in the media. And both of these things influence the political system in the United States for better or for worse. So let's just start with interest groups to begin. Interest groups are organizations that represent specific policy topics that either citizens or businesses favor the most. And it could be a wide range of things. It could be activities that individual people are involved with. It could be activities that entire industries involved with. But what happens is there's some type of interest taken in a particular topic that the government might become involved with or already is. And individuals or companies come together, or maybe a combination of both, to try to form a group so that way they can speak up about this particular topic to their representatives at the state and local government. So, some examples of interest groups would be like the National Rifle Association. It represents the concerns of firearm owners throughout the United States, so it mostly is tied to individual people. Or, for instance, the Sierra Club, which represents the interests of people that want to protect the environment. That would be another example. But there's also interest groups that represent the automobile manufacturers in the United States, something that's called a trade association. And of course, there's labor unions that represent particular types of workers that can only be found maybe in one specific industry. So all these types of interest groups basically come together and they raise money the same way a party might through donations, and they then hire people to work full time if they have enough money, attorneys, because obviously lawyers are the ones that understand the law the most. And they also are able to produce, in some cases, propaganda to help entice more people to join their cause, or to convince the public that maybe a certain law they would like pushed through Harrisburg or Washington, D.C. is in everyone's best interests. And just to give you an example, if the next Congress decides to limit, for instance, the types of firearms that are sold, or the amount of ammunition that is sold, or anything like that, obviously the NRA is going to visit with each of the representatives and senators to convince them that that's not a good thing and that they should refuse to pass some type of bill. They'll also put out advertisements through social media and TV to try to convince the public to also contact their representatives to make sure that type of legislation wouldn't pass. I can also work the opposite direction. For instance, the Sierra Club, if there's a new initiative involving climate change, for instance, and limiting pollution, they're going to contact their representatives and senators to make sure that does pass. And they're also going to run ads to try to convince the public to harangue their representatives to do the same. So these interest groups tie in a lot with, of course, the media that we'll talk about here in a little bit, because they utilize different types of media, such as literature, TV ads, and social media, in order to convince elected officials, but also the public, that whatever their position is correct. Now, some people believe that because of this, it's very easy to persuade politicians, but you have to remember that there's interest groups usually on both sides of each issue. So it's often a fair debate between different groups in order to put forward the best ideas. And some people also think that interest groups have too much influence over the elected officials. But remember that if you're a politician, when you ran for office in the first place, you probably already had a position on firearms. You probably already had a position on pollution. So when these groups come to you, they're not necessarily going to sway you to change your mind about these two topics, just whether or not this legislation is a good idea. And so people often already have their minds made up. Interest groups can also create what are called political action committees, or PACs, as they're called, PACs. They raise enormous amounts of money for some of these efforts, and they can sometimes, in some cases, raise money from especially wealthy people or businesses, and it's not really known exactly where that money is coming from. And some people think that is dangerous because it can give certain individuals a lot of unfair advantage over influencing how our laws are passed if they gain control of one of these groups and try to push their agenda more than anybody else. And then, of course, there's lobbyists. Lobbyist is a word that we throw around a lot. And of course, it comes back from a time when these individuals used to meet with politicians in the lobby, for instance. But lobbyists are hired by interest groups. And these are individuals that specialize, and a lot of them are attorneys, but they don't have to be, on this one particular topic, and their job is to go around and meet with politicians personally in order to convince them to support or object to certain pieces of legislation. Now, one of the controversial things about this is that some ex politicians become lobbyists, and they have a lot of rights. For instance, if you're a former member of the House, to go to the Capitol building, to even go out into the floor of the House, and so on. So, some people think that gives these lobbyists, in some cases, an unfair advantage. And they also know the ins and outs of campaigns. So, lobbyists would often, through their interest groups, make donations to politicians' campaigns, or if they want to talk to them about supporting this particular law, they'll take them to an exotic location in order to discuss it with them, which is basically like a getaway vacation. And so some people look at lobbying as kind of a legal way of bribing elected officials. And so that can sometimes be controversial as well. Now, I just want to talk about the media in particular, because obviously interest groups use the media quite a bit in order to convince people and politicians of their positions. But media itself has always had a type of purpose behind it in getting information out. The media represents the interests of the public, specifically getting the truth and making sure all the facts are obvious to everyone. And in government, obviously, when laws are passed, especially when you have a small group of people doing it, for instance, the United States House and Senate is only 535 people altogether, there can be a lot of secrets. And so the main purpose of the media, it's often called the fourth estate because it's beyond the government and other parts of society that can actually go out and represent the truth. It doesn't have to worry about being reelected. And the media has evolved over the years, of course, from newspapers to radio to TV and now social media, but it has some of the same positive effects and also some of the negative ones. Of course, the positive ones are it gets out the truth and allows a wide variety of opinions to be shared with the public. But a negative part of that is that it, of course, involves bias. And bias can take shape in two different forms. The media can be biased in a sense of financial profit. They will try to increase the number of likes, increase the number of subscribers, increase the number of advertisers that want to promote on their particular TV station, for instance. And so maybe